Hey everyone, welcome to this podcast called Ken Reads, where I, Ken, read out your letter that you've shared with me in the hopes that I can better help you understand what the F just happened between you and the last partner you were dating, whether it was in a relationship or a situationship. I look at these experiences from the lens of attachment theory. I don't just come up with thought terminating cliches like, they're just not that into you, or if they wanted to, they would. While some of those phrases might have their benefit in other dynamics, I try and look at this from the lens of, is there perhaps an insecure attachment issue that's at play in these particular dynamics? And though I am an Australian counsellor, I am not someone who is going to be responding to these letters as if I was with a client. I'm here to provide validation, yes, but I can't provide any diagnoses on these. So even if, a lot of people might understandably hear this and be like, well, that sounds like a narcissist. At best, I'll probably say, sounds a bit narky. I probably won't go any further than that out of respect to my ethical boundaries in regards to what I can and can't do. If you find this of benefit to you, fantastic. That's what I want. And if you want to submit your letter, you're very welcome to, once there is obviously availability per month. And I'll happily read out and share my own 2 cents as to what I think has gone on in your dating experience to offer you a sense of validation for what you've been through, and also to give other people listening a chance to feel like maybe this relates to what they've also experienced as part of collective healing. So with that all out of the way, let's dive in to the latest letter. So, for today's letter reading, we're going to be reading out Simone's letter involving her experiences dating Jack. And before we get into this letter reading, I'm pleased to welcome back Amy, who, by the way, you've been like popular demand. Like, I've had several people be like, oh, I want a letter reading with Amy. And so she's back again, everyone.
Hi, everyone. I'm so happy to be here as always, and I'm extra happy now that I know that I've been missed. That's so cool. Thank you. I'm really happy. Happy New Year. I hope everyone had a great holiday, and yeah, I'm so excited to get back into the letters.
So on this occasion, I, for once, am going to take a breath and actually listen to Amy read the letter. And we're going to go through this and hear what Simone has to say. So, without further ado, Amy, fire away.
All right, here we go. Dear Ken, I hope this letter finds you well. In 2016, I reconnected with Jack, someone I had known when we were teenagers. We initially met at school. We're both 50, and even then, we had such a strong connection. However, life took us in different directions. He moved overseas with his family, and I stayed in our hometown in the UK. Some years later, in my early 20s, I moved to Australia, where I eventually met my now ex-husband of 21 years. After my divorce, I began reconnecting with my family in the UK, something I hadn't done much of during my marriage. On one of my visits to the UK, I ran into Jack, who was also visiting our hometown. We reconnected instantly and began communicating regularly. Over time, we shared our stories about our recent divorces and discovered we had an even deeper bond. Soon, our conversations turned from casual to romantic. By my third trip to the UK, we confessed our feelings for each other and began a long distance relationship. For a while, despite the distance, the relationship felt fulfilling. We weren't in a rush to change our living situations, given our individual commitments to work and family and the stages of life we were both in. His declarations of love were frequent and intense. He would tell me, I would die for you. You are the woman of my dreams, and I love you utterly. And I love you with passion beyond anything I've ever known or will ever know. Wow. However, after periods of closeness, he would disappear without contact for days or weeks at a time, only to return with apologies saying he had been busy or unwell. I also began to notice a pattern forming where he would withdraw or disappear on special occasions, such as my birthday and Christmas. This was incredibly hurtful, especially as he would imply that he had made plans to surprise me and once even took a day off of work so that we could share a date over the phone on my birthday, which never happened because he disappeared and went off drinking instead. This pattern also occurred on occasions when I needed surgery, where I would anticipate a call before and after surgery only to be stood up. I repeatedly asked him to send a simple message instead of going silent, as the lack of communication, especially across countries, caused me significant anxiety. Okay, let's take a pause here. Okay, so switch it up, Ken. Why don't you go first? And what are your thoughts so far?
What I think really scares me the most is the fact that this is also happening whilst they're doing long distance. I mean, to me, it's one thing when you're dating someone in the country and they're starting to pull away because of growing intimacy. But I think there's something quite extreme about this, which is giving me a bit of, some concerns. So the thing that immediately stood out to me was not so much their shared history and their experience. I'm like, that's lovely. The thing that actually really stood out to me was the intensity of the comments he was making, his affection, saying, "You are the woman of my dreams, Simone. I love you utterly. I love you with passion beyond anything I've ever known or ever will know." To me, that is a lot, like a lot, a lot. And normally I will point out the intensity of some of those lot of love bomby comments, if you will. But to me, this is like an 11 out of 10 sort of stuff. And I mean, don't be wrong, I love a bit of love bombing. I love receiving love bombing, but I'm also wise enough to know that if, you're saying that like to that extent, there's usually a lot of there's might be more than just, affection going on. There could also be some infatuation, limerence, idealization, particularly around that woman of my dreams comment. And then I find it strange that the woman of his dreams is someone who he can't seem to message on special occasions like birthdays or when you're going through surgery. It's just like, how does this work out? So, yeah, to me, this is already, in spite of your history of knowing one another and obviously having had just, a similar history with divorce, I'm already sensing that the foundations of a healthy relationship aren't quite there. What are your thoughts, Amy?
Yes, I really agree, Ken. And it's funny because right. We all love, maybe we all, well, not all of us, dismissive avoidants don't love to be love bombed, but I think all of the other attachment styles do like a little love bombiness here and there. Everybody likes to be told, I love you utterly with passion. You're the woman of my dreams. But it's almost like, okay, that's nice in theory, and that's really nice in a song, and I love to see it in a rom-com. But you're right, in person, especially over a long distance relationship, and where it's sort of building over a shorter amount of time, despite the fact that they knew each other earlier, it seems unbalanced. It seems like an 11 out of 10. You're so right. And it just doesn't sound stable, right? It doesn't sound like the relationship has realistically, organically, and authentically built to this stage where these words should be exchanged. And moreover, and most importantly, as you pointed out, these words are in such stark contrast to him disappearing on Christmas, birthdays, surgery days. And so when you have this extreme verbal expression of affection and love and devotion, and they're not aligned at all or consistently with the actions, you're so right in that it seems like the foundation of something very shaky or a shaky foundation is being formed rather than something that will potentially offer, stability and security in the future.
Yep, I completely agree. And I already get the impression that for Jack, something that, is interesting to me is so why doesn't he reach out on special occasions? Why does he find it hard to reach out with regards to when Simone's going for surgery? To me, I think the surgery one I can kind of understand because that could be a fear of loss. And I know a lot of fearful avoidants have a big fear of loss, and that makes sense. But the birthdays one, it's like, okay, is that because that's around commitment and intimacy and also not wanting to officialize it, not wanting to acknowledge something like that? Or maybe it's because birthdays was something that was deeply triggering for him because he never got acknowledged on a birthday. Who knows? That's speculation city. But the point simply is that he's demonstrated times where his insecurities have not allowed him to connect with Simone when she's really needed it.
Yeah, definitely. And so I think it's safe to say our first set of red flags have appeared. So let's continue. When he would visit me in Australia, the pattern of disappearing continued. His visits would start with excitement and anticipation, but after a few days, he would grow distant and agitated. Despite knowing his stay was short, he'd say things like, I just need to get out of here, or I can't think here, I need space. This behavior was confusing as we were only spending a limited amount of time together. We would seemingly resolve it, and he'd assure me of his love and commitment before leaving to return to the UK, both of us tearful at the airport. But once he returned home, he would go silent again, sometimes for days, even weeks. Often, I wouldn't know if he'd arrived home safely. My messages and calls would go unanswered, leaving me in despair. When he finally would get in touch, it was the same pattern, profuse apologies followed by deep declarations of love. The cycle repeated over and over throughout the almost 9-year relationship. It became very clear when he visited me how much he drank, and he would then return home and drink heavily. In 2023, after multiple instances where he hinted at ending things, only to come back a few days later saying things like, I was wrong to say that, I'm mad I let you go, or I regret that deeply, please let's give this a go, we were meant to be together. He finally broke up with me. It came at a particularly hard time for me. I was in the middle of moving house with my children, struggling with finances and stress as Christmas approached. He enthusiastically insisted he would come and help me with the move, which I was incredibly grateful for. Then, just before my moving day, he sent me a text message saying, I can't do this. I can't give you what you need, and I don't think I'm in love with you anymore.
Oh,
This was complete, yeah, that's gutting. This was a complete shock to me, as only a few days before this, we were in love and planning to visit Australia. Okay, I think we need to pause here.
yeah, we need to pause and just take a moment. Like, good grief. This is actually really fucking selfish behavior on Jack's part because even if he wasn't intending to be malicious, I just think it's not okay that he allowed his insecurities to dictate the relationship to such an extent. Like, for Simone, she's obviously in a very vulnerable position, with finances, kids, a move, they're all big things to think about when you're a single mum and you're often strapped in many big ways. And I feel like, you know, he's obviously given Simone moments where he's suggested that he's about to break up before and then come back to her being like, oh, I was wrong to do that. We should try and make this work. I have heard from people with big relationship OCD share when they've, come out of recovery, how like, oh yeah, those are the thoughts and feelings of someone for who's a fearful avoidant, because you've got those parts that are like, I need this to work. I want to make it work because I can't handle loss. And then you got those other avoidant parts, which are like, maybe, you don't actually like this person. Maybe you actually just, you're just infatuated and you may not like her. Or, saying things like, you can't give her what she needs. Why are you, leading her on? So it's like, you need therapy. You can't let your brain do this to a relationship like this.
Yeah, no, completely. And I'm glad that you brought up attachment styles. Usually we've brought it up earlier by now, but and you touched on it before. I think you're so right. We are definitely at least in fearful avoidant territory. We are definitely not in dismissive avoidant territory.
No way.
Um, yeah, not even close. But I have to say, even so, this to me is on the extreme, the extreme side of the spectrum within the fearful avoidant portion. Um, we have the classic hot and cold. We have the classic very intense right from the get-go, love bombing, and then we have the pulling back. But the reason why I think this is extreme and above and beyond just normal fearful avoidant behavior is because yes, fearful avoidance will be hot and cold. Yes, they will change their minds, but they don't usually change their minds this many times in such a short period of time, right? Like this activation and then deactivation, it will happen. usually at turning points in the relationship. And yes, it will be drastic and it can be quite cold, but it seems like he is just really Jack here is coming in hot and then pulling out and then coming in hot and then pulling out cold and it's frequent and the language he's using is extreme and he's doing it around travel dates and holidays. And so I know that Simone mentioned that he might have a drinking problem, and I think that the veracity of this hot and cold behavior might be exacerbated by a deeper problem with addiction, perhaps. What do you
I
think,
com-
Ken?
I completely agree. And I suspect that the drinking is probably to numb a lot of the internal stuff going on inside of him, like shame. Like, I suspect that he's someone who battles a lot of shame inside of himself and also can't handle, being a bad person. I know because of this course that I'm doing, which I've talked about a few times on recent episodes, that there's, a lot of shame that's buried beneath a lot of these jarring actions. And to be on the receiving end of this, it's just so painful and traumatic. And also deeply, it gives deep abandonment to a partner as well, especially in a time of crisis where Simone's moving. Moves are not pleasant experiences for the most part, in that once it's all done and dusted, it can be fantastic. But when you're a single mum and you're trying to make a move with your kids and you're strapped for finances, you need help much of the time. And trying to do it, all by yourself, regardless of, whether you're a man, a woman, a person who's non-binary, I think you do need to get support, and just having a partner there to, have your back is great. So it's terrible for him to, on one hand, be like, I'll absolutely be there for you, and then drop her cold, on the day before that. That's just so cruel and unfair.
Oh my gosh, yeah. And you know what? I'm really glad that you brought that up again. She is a single mom. And, you know, anyone who's not even a mom, even men understand for the most part that it's hard to be a mom. It's super duper hard to be a single mom. I mean, it's just hard to be a human. So the fact that not only is he the one sort of initiating these promises, like, oh, I'll come help you move. It doesn't seem like Simone is the one initiating these things. It doesn't seem to be that she is reaching out asking for things that he has been clearly reluctant to provide. It seems like the opposite. It seems like she's just kind of there, trying to believe him, trying to balance it. He's coming in hot, offering her things, and then he's pulling out. And I have to say, yes, we are all responsible for what we tolerate and for how we process other people's emotions. But it is pretty inarguable that when you are in a relationship with someone and there are deep feelings there and they pull back in times of stress, not only that, but via text, not even in a phone call, not even in a face meeting or a FaceTime where you sit and give a good explanation. It is it is shocking to the system because you have to understand. Listeners can understand this obviously, but for you guys listening, you know, um, our attachment system, when we're in a relationship with someone, we attach to someone. And this is a process that happens in our subconscious mind, in the domain of our nervous system. And we innately know biologically in children and in childhood and both in adult romantic relationships, having an attachment figure is good. We try to attach. And then when an attachment figure pulls back from us or disappears out of nowhere, it quite literally sends our system into some degree of shock. And our nervous system, is processing this as, oh my God, this is a threat to my survival. And of course, this exacerbates and manifests in accordance to the level of your wounding. But, all this to say, this is very traumatic. Okay, let's continue. Let's see. Okay. When he finally agreed and reluctantly agreed to speak with me on the phone, it was like talking to a stranger. He was cold, emotionless, robotic, and he kept repeating, I can't give you what you need. I just need to be alone. He later sent a follow-up message which read, I have come too late to realize that my toxicity is so acute that I have to isolate myself completely from any romantic, intimate, loving relation or it will kill me. My only hope against total despair is in living as mindful of the malignity in me as possible necessarily autonomous work. I am striving for my autonomy. When he ended the relationship just before Christmas, he also decided to become sober. It felt as though, in his effort to clean out his life, he chose to dispose of me in the process, even though I had been nothing but supportive of him. It hurts to think that I was only worthy of him during his drunk, chaotic times, but as soon as he decided to become sober, he cast me aside, disregarding the many years we spent together and the deep love we shared. I just want to pause briefly here and let Ken comment because this is just it's so cutting.
I was going to go so far as to say disgusting as well too, because I mean, I get like if Jack was my client, I'd obviously be speaking to him very differently, saying, okay, I can understand why your inner critic is telling you that you need to be alone, that you can't give this person what you need. But as a edutainer who's taking the letter writer, you know, Simone's side within reason, not as a counselor, but just as a, as a listener of this and as a fellow reader, I just think this is so unbelievably selfish. I feel like Jack probably believes he's doing the most selfless thing. I'm taking myself out of the equation so that way I can do better for everyone else. It's like, but you don't know that you're doing better for everyone else because you've decided to essentially just leave the relationship and not involve Simone in your recovery plan. And it's basically making her feel like she's part of that toxicity that you're trying to rid yourself of. And I know for Jack, he probably doesn't mean it quite like that, but it's clear he's not thinking about her wants and needs at all. Like, and when someone is fearful avoidant, particularly more avoidant leaning, and those wounds are activated, this is not an excuse what I'm about to say. It's just the reality of it, unfortunately. Many of them are very bloody selfish because they're trying to fill an empty cup and to try and manage their emotional distress without thinking about what's going on for the other person as a consequence of their actions. So this is very textbook sort of stuff, but it's so unfair and wrong for him to be doing it the way that he's doing it. Like, I mean, you know, because he's basically, it sounds to me as though he hasn't actually directly hashed this out with Simone, saying, here are my issues. This is what I need to work on. I've got an alcohol problem. I'm worried about this affecting the relationship. Can we talk about it? It sounds like none of that conversation was happening. It was just a case of, oh, maybe I don't want this. No, I really do want this. That's confusing as fuck to be on the receiving end of that. I feel like this is like false accountability. He's like, oh yeah, I need to just be autonomous for a while. He won't be. We know historically people like this, boomerang or monkey branch into a new relationship as well too. So I feel like a lot of this is just his way of pacifying his own shame and anxiety. But I will say just very quickly, the whole like him becoming cold, emotionless, and robotic. Oh yeah, he froze in that moment. It sounds to me like he just gave the fuck up on this relationship.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, I totally agree. And it's like it is so deeply unfair and you said it so perfectly, Ken. It's like this false sense of accountability. It's almost like, and truthfully, good on him for getting sober and good on him for trying to heal and take control of his life. We can never fault someone for doing that. It's incredibly hard. That's amazing. But it is almost like he is trying to rid himself of any guilt or bury his head in the sand and pretend like he is doing the altruistic thing by exiting this relationship with Simone so that he doesn't hurt her and he doesn't hurt other people and he can focus on himself. And that's fine. Excuse me, that's fine. But like you said, often what makes these sorts of situations so insanely brutal, especially when one party is secure or anxious and the other party is some sort of avoidant, whether that's fearful or dismissive, is that these decisions seem to be made unilaterally out of the company of the other person in the relationship. And that's not to say that anyone should be allowed to leave a relationship whenever they want for whatever reason. That is true. We can always leave a relationship because we want to, because we're not happy. But when you come to the table with this decision made with almost no warning, and you say that, you're doing it for the good of everyone and you don't involve the other person in the decision, it's so disrespectful. It feels very manipulative and it just makes it feel more traumatic. And I just want to say one more thing before we continue on with the letter is that Simone, I so understand how it would make you feel like you were only worthy of him during his drunk, chaotic times, and that when he became sober, he cast you aside. But I promise you, I don't think it's that. You are so worthy of so much more. You are so worthy of stable and secure love. And I don't even think that when he was telling you this, he was looking at you as not worthy of the sober, better him. It's just when people are working through their stuff, especially people with fearful avoidant or dismissive avoidant attachment, other people or other obligations, for lack of a better term, in their life, other people with expectations, they feel is a big threat to their healing. And it's usually so hard for them to come to a point where they are doing this work that they sort of do just wipe everything off the table and try to start clean. But again, it's really not fair.
Yeah.
Okay, we'll continue. Did you want to chime in, Ken, on that?
There was one last thing I was going to say too, which is on the note of being drunk. It wouldn't surprise me if he's the kind of guy where he could actually get quite close to you when he's drunk, but then also push you away when he's sober. Because when a lot of people drink, a lot of their fears are temporarily taken away. So you often get a lot of the emotion underneath that. But that was just a quick little note that I wanted to throw out there. But please continue.
Yeah, that's a really, really good point. We see that a lot with people with avoidant attachment, how they sort of get in touch with their feelings with a little alcohol. But I guess, don't we all? Okay.
And
After
that's not,
spending,
by the way, that's not our encouragement to do that.
right, yes. Disclaimer, we're not encouraging that. Okay. After spending weeks and months trying to heal and rebuild my life after our abrupt breakup, I was caught off guard in September last year when he reached out to me by email. He expressed remorse for how he had ended things so abruptly and wanted to speak. After carefully considering his email for 1 week, I decided to reply. I told him that I had been forced to process the breakup on my own without any closure from him, and that I would only agree to speak to him if it was truly to close the book, gain clarity, and if one specific condition was met. The condition was that he was not in nor seeking any romantic, intimate, or sexual relationship with someone else. This condition was rooted in the primary reason he had given me for our breakup, which was, I don't want or desire to be with anybody else. I need to be alone and work on myself. That reason had been the foundation upon which I had worked to heal, and I didn't want to undo my progress by reopening communication only to find that he had moved on. He assured me I am not, nor do I desire to be in an intimate relationship with anybody else. Based on that assurance, I agreed to speak with him. Initially, our conversation felt healing. We discussed the breakup, and I was able to ask questions I hadn't had the chance to before. Each call seemed to lead to another as he would follow up by suggesting new topics for future discussions, all centered on healing. During one of these calls, he spoke about how deeply transfixed and drawn to me he still was. As he had during our relationship, he used amorous language, expressing how dedicated he was to me sexually and how he couldn't imagine being with another woman. After about a month of these weekly conversations, I informed him that I would be traveling to the UK in early December for my 50th birthday. I made it clear that the trip had been planned for months and had nothing to do with him. He was clearly excited and immediately began suggesting plans for us to meet. He proposed places we could visit together and even suggested the possibility of staying together intimately. While his enthusiasm was flattering, it also concerned me, given how cruelly he had ended things before. I cautiously agreed to meet him, but avoided making detailed plans. Very smart. In the week leading up to my trip, his excitement and apparent longing for me seemed to grow. He repeatedly told me how much he desired me, how I was the woman of his dreams, how he could never imagine being with another woman. And then, just a week before my trip, he sent me a blunt and devastating message. I slept with someone. I was shaken to my core after so many years of him declaring that he could never imagine such a thing, and especially after his recent reassurances that he wasn't in or seeking intimacy with anyone else. This felt like betrayal. I spoke with him. He explained that it had happened at a work event where he had stayed in a shared house and slept with a woman he had never met and would likely never see again. His explanation oscillated between sounding confident and oddly defensive. He said things like, I had to do this for myself. And I felt you had such a pull on me. I had to break that. It became clear to me that this act was less about the woman and more about him trying to assert some form of autonomy and sever what he perceived as my hold over him. As my trip drew closer, he grew colder. He eventually sent me a message that read, If you still want to come to the UK, you obviously can. I will agree to meet you, but I don't need to see you for my own healing. The message was incredibly hurtful, especially given how enthusiastically had been just a week prior. It felt like a complete reversal of his earlier excitement and plans. While I had my own reasons for the trip, his cold and dismissive tone deeply upset me. It felt like another cruel blow layered on top of everything else he had done. I felt betrayed and angry that I had agreed to reopen dialogue with him at his request, only to then be treated as if it was me who pursued him. Despite the hurt, I traveled to the UK for my trip, unsure of what to expect from him. His behavior leading up to the visit had been erratic and emotionally taxing, leaving me questioning his true intentions and feelings. During my visit, I made a conscious decision to be open, vulnerable, and authentic about my feelings. I shared how much I had loved him and still did, even though I knew there was uncertainty in how he felt. His behavior during the trip was confusing and contradictory. At times, he was distant and closed off, even finding it difficult to hug me. Yet at other moments, his gestures and words suggested deep affection and unresolved feelings. One morning, I woke up to several messages from him. He had written, I'm at the cafe around the corner. If it's not too late and I haven't already ruined the chance, would you like to meet me before I go to work? I've made you a packed lunch. When we met, he handed me a packed lunch that he had prepared with great care. It included some of my favorite foods and a lip balm because I had mentioned that my lips were dry from the cold, a heart-shaped stone he had collected from the beach, a handmade juice, and some special biscuits. He also included two notes. One read, Let's make sculptures with our bodies, and the other read, I am alive, so I'm going to dance. During this interaction, he hugged me warmly, and I felt he was letting his guard down. Later that evening, we met again, but by then his demeanor had shifted back to being distant and guarded. This pattern of mixed signals was a reoccurring theme during my visit. He told me that spending time with me was dangerous, which I interpreted to mean that he felt he could easily fall back into the love and connection we once shared, but it threatened the rigid control he was trying to maintain over his life. At another point, he commented, You're so powerful, which felt like an acknowledgement of how deeply I affected him emotionally. He also said, You're so beautiful, and described me as looking like Aphrodite emerging from the sea.
Jesus.
These words and yeah, these words and gestures suggested a lingering desire and affection, even though he was actively trying to push me away. Okay, let's pause because that was a lot, and I am dying to hear what you are thinking, Ken.
So much to say. Okay. Um, there's many thoughts, but I want to start with one at a time. The first thing I want to say is idealization. I feel like this man has been idealizing you from the start and projecting a lot of his unmet fantasies and unrealistic expectations onto Simone. I feel like, this whole thing of like, you're like Aphrodite emerging from the sea, this very florid language. I'm sure he feels this way, but this is a sign of someone who's obviously suffered deep emotional neglect in his childhood origin, and he's looking to have his emotional needs met with you, of having like, the most amazing partner. And whilst there's also the avoidant piece, which we'll get into in a hot second, I want listeners to be aware of this. This language is a red fucking flag because this person is not grounded. This person, it's not to say that he's doing this with malice and intent to try and, hook Simone in. I think a lot of this is just his own unmet childhood needs coming out in the form of limerence and an idealization where he's just expecting, Simone to be this goddess. But I think that it's also one of those things where he's deeply, deeply, deeply afraid of letting her in, and he's committed the ultimate betrayal. I'm going to take a pause here. Amy, what are your thoughts on all this?
Oh my goodness. Yes, yes. I think that is so much of what is going on here, Ken, the idealization. And it's so interesting because most people don't know what Ken was just explaining, that that really can come from childhood wounding, from this intense emotional neglect where someone projects their deepest fantasies, or this adult romantic relationship version of something, this need that they didn't have fulfilled in childhood. Um, and it is just, it's brutal and it's very selfish. It's highly emotionally unstable and emotionally immature, and it's cruel. And the thing here that we always say is yes, this behavior is likely coming from a place of his own wounding. And at the same time, that doesn't matter because the result of his behavior is extreme pain to you, Simone. And I just feel so badly for you that you went through this, because we can see why and how you let him in. We can see why you thought that this time would be different, or that he had finally gotten it together and figured it out. Um, first of all, you had this baseline of trust with him, of having known him since you were younger. And so that already lends itself to, perhaps a little more trust than he deserved. And that's not your fault. But he's the one who is sort of aggressively pursuing you and then pulling back. And the thing is, when he pulls back, he's not saying something that would register with most people as a legitimate, real answer or explanation from truth. He's saying things that are really screaming, this is coming from fear, this is coming from my own wounding, but I still love you. And in those cases, it really is hard to walk away from someone, especially when they say that they're doing healing work and they're trying, and they love bomb you and they reassure you and they're being the pursuers. It's just so hard. And so many people find themselves caught in these situations. And one thing that I think is particularly egregious, that really kind of strikes me as like above and beyond any kind of, fearful avoidance or dismissive avoidance, is that he said to you, during this time when he was explaining to you that he didn't really need to see you during this trip, so you could go if you wanted to. But then he wrote, because I don't need to see you for my own healing. And it's like, how unbelievably selfish is that? It's like, was he trying to get you to come there and meet with him this whole time for his own healing? And then he decided, oh, wait, I'm doing good on my own, so actually I don't need to see you. It's just so incredibly selfish. And I hope, Simone, that when you look at him, and we can talk about this more toward the end, that you view him as a wounded child. And I don't mean that in a derogatory way, but oftentimes when we are romantically entangled with someone and we feel abandoned by them, by this, this loving, masculine or feminine adult romantic figure, when we feel like they have done us wrong, it feels so cutting and so painful. But if we look at them and we see the wounded child in them, not in a way to let them off the hook, but in a way to see, wow, I don't think I was really interacting with someone who was in their wise adult self. I was literally interacting with someone's wounded inner child. And I think that that makes it easier to move on. What do you think, Ken?
I completely agree. In fact, to extend on that point about the wounded child, I think it's almost like he sees you as a doll, a pretty character to play with, but when he spends too much time with it, he gets a new doll and he plays with it for a while. And then he comes back to the doll that he was idealizing and being like, oh, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to get rid of you. It was just that I had to because it was getting too much to be with just this one doll. So I'm going to go out and get another one just to, make me feel better. It's like, oh, so this is all about you and not about how Simone's feeling. And unlike a doll, which has no empathy or the capacity to feel for obvious reasons. Human beings do bleed and feel. This is just not okay sort of behavior. And one thing that really I want to also share with people, because I'm sure a lot of people will relate to this, Simone set a boundary upon his return. I will only interact with you if you can tell me you are not seeing anyone else, because that would break me. And he said, I'm not. You're the only one for me. And he would continue to reassure her that that was the case. And then he fucking cheated on her. Like, I think to me, and then the whole thing of like, oh, I just had to do it. Now I know why he said that. Like, that's the avoidance side looking for space because it was freaking out. I get that aspect. He ain't my client. I don't fucking care what his mental health history is. The fact of the matter is, that's damaging to people's, well-being to do that shit. You just like betrayal trauma is some of the most insidious pain a person will ever go through. You don't fucking do that to someone. That's relationship ending stuff right there. And look, this is where I'm now going to say, pointing the finger a little bit to Simone now, that would have been a game over for me. I'd have been like, enough, we're done, because that is like a betrayal you just don't walk back from. And I can see, look, if this is your first time in the ringer, Simone, I'm not about to judge you or be like, you should have known better. No, these experiences are very confusing, but I will say, appalling. And how many times have people dated avoidance where they've said, I was ghosted badly in the past, I was cheated, I was blindsided, please don't do that to me. And then the avoidant partner still does it anyways. It's like, it's almost like, what's the point of having boundaries if there's people just don't even fucking respect your boundaries? And of course, this is the severe end of the spectrum. We're not talking about like the mild to moderate avoidant attachers who are really, actively working on it themselves. This is for the group of people who, hear you and are like nodding, going, yeah, 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 no, absolutely, I'd never do that to you. And then they go and fucking do it anyways. It's like, well, you're a liar, you're an abuser, and you need to go to the nearest trauma-informed clinic instead of dating around with people like myself.
Yeah, it's true. And it's really hard because we get into relationships with people and we are inherently vulnerable, right? It's almost like if you get into an elevator with someone and they have a wicked cold or flu or something, and they are sneezing and they're not covering their mouth and they're pressing all the buttons with their germy hands, and you're in this enclosed space with them. You are vulnerable to their germs. You might get sick. You are going to be inhaling their dirty, germy air. And in relationship, when we get into relationships with people who are emotionally unhealthy, who have really bad relationships with themselves, which then turn into, unhealthy relationships with others, we are vulnerable to that trauma. Trauma is contagious in that way. Trauma is contagious in the way that if you are someone who has a whole bunch of wounds and you're interacting closely with people, the people closest to you will be most impacted negatively by your wounds because we are not able to handle people with care, with proper emotional care and a responsible, respectful way that won't hurt them when we've got a bunch of wounding. And the dangerous part of that is that when we date people, a lot of times, especially fearful avoidance will appear to be, pretty secure. And honestly, any attachment style can appear to be pretty secure in the beginning. But again, once the relationship gets closer and an attachment is formed, then the wounds surface, and they will surface. Like they just will. It is not a question of if, it's a question of when. And if you do not have, reign over your inner demons, so to speak, they will run amok and they will really damage people. And unfortunately, the people in these relationships do end up sort of being collateral damage. And hopefully, and truthfully, a lot of the time, that is not the end of their story. They are not just collateral damage because so much healing and growth and beautiful things can come from being on the hurt end of these relationships, but it is dangerous. It is a risk. And, again, Simone, we're so sorry. And, I think you actually might have been in a period of pause with him when he said that he had slept with someone. But even so, he promised you that he hadn't, that he wasn't going to. And in fact, that was your one condition. And then he texts you again, I slept with someone. Just a PSA to anyone listening, don't have conversations like this over text. At bare minimum, have them on FaceTime. Like, have courage. And again, that's something that you don't get in a relationship with wounded people, which again is a whole nother problem. But, this is, I'm just so sorry. Like Ken said, betrayal trauma is just another layer, and it's just so hard. And we're really sorry, Simone. Let's move on, and then we can talk more about your healing at the end. Okay, let's see. Despite these tender moments, much of his behavior felt emotionally guarded. He spoke about his current mindset, which seemed rigid and overly simplified. He described his approach to life as needing to address one area, such as body or intellect, before moving on to other aspects, such as relationships. He viewed this as a hierarchy, saying that he couldn't be anything to anyone unless he had tended to himself. While I could understand the importance of self-care, his approach seemed extreme and unbalanced. We met the night before I flew home, and he was warm, open, kind, loving, and honest. I felt he told me that he wanted to debrief via telephone when I arrived home. He expressed concern for me having to take such a long flight, given how emotionally charged the visit had been, as well as my return flight coinciding with the anniversary of my father's death. We agreed to catch up over the phone when I had returned home. However, after I returned home, emotionally exhausted from the trip, he sent me a message. It was a brutal final message stating that he no longer wanted any contact. It read, I cannot speak. I have given all I can give. Any more is damage that is not mine to bear. From now on, I can no longer be in contact with you. He provided no explanation or acknowledgement of the time we had shared during my visit. This message came after a 24-hour flight. He didn't even check if I had arrived home safely, and just days before Christmas. The coldness and abruptness of his words felt deeply cruel and undeserved, especially given the vulnerability I had shown during my visit. It also felt hurtful since I had felt like I had been the one giving, where he had been closed off to truth and openness. It also felt incredibly triggering, given that it was him who had asked to reopen our contact. Since receiving that message, I have chosen to remain silent. I have not responded. I believe his actions do not deserve my continued emotional energy. Meanwhile, he has updated his social media with cryptic posts and new profile photos, where he describes himself as feeling relieved and ecstatic. These updates feel dismissive of the pain he caused and only add to my confusion and hurt. Needless to say, I'm devastated and feel set back. Any insight into this dynamic would be so valuable. Is he avoidant? Why has he cut me off again so abruptly? Did almost 9 years mean so little? What is your insight? So we will definitely get to those questions, but Ken, what is your take of the ending of this letter?
I normally would never say this because I think I like to let people come to their own decisions. Me speaking not as a counselor, just me as a human being, never let this man back into your life. Like, just do not let this man back into your life, like at all. Like, I gotta be honest, I've heard of some accounts of people committing suicide over this kind of behavior. Like, this shit will destroy you. Now, the reason I don't normally say that is because it's not my place. As a counselor, I let people, figure things out, and I have absolute faith that people will figure them out. And hell, I've got some clients who are still, going through the thick of it with a fearful avoidant partner, trying their best to see if they can find ways to make it work. Yeah, they probably won't, but that's not the point. The point is that they are doing such amazing things to try implementing secure steps in these dynamics to see if they can, understand what's going on. And it's so good because when that's ideally what we want for people is we want them to practice secure modeling, to try and actually work on these dynamics with the knowledge, to try and, see if change is possible. And even if it's not, who cares? You learn so much from the experience, and you're on a much better trajectory to find someone who is secure leaning as a consequence. And sometimes you need to go through the thick of it with a partner like this to eventually realize there was no hope here, but I had to make that decision for myself. I'm going to jump in here and say, with this one, don't even try. Like, don't even go there. Like, this is just a hard no from me. And I think this is because this is fucked beyond belief. Like, this is so truly bad. And, it's funny. I know you were suggesting, Amy, like there's something, above and beyond with avoidant attachment here and possibly a personality disorder. Whilst I don't necessarily see that as such, I will say that it doesn't really matter. But to me, the behavior is more striking than, a label at this particular point in time, which is Jack is using Simone due to his emotional stuff that he's clearly not working on. And each and every time you get close, he discards you harder and more painfully than before. I normally don't like using the term discard to describe an avoidant breakup because I don't think it's done with the malicious intent of a narcissist. But on this occasion, I'm going to use it because I really do feel like that's what it would feel like. You have had it's not just 9 years though, Simone, if you think about it. This has been a childhood friend who's done this to you too, right? This is someone you've been in a relationship with for 9 years, but there's so much other stuff going on here as well too. And I think it really speaks to the fact that this is a dangerous, dangerous guy. He love bombs the shit out of you when he's feeling lonely and fears losing you. Then he pulls an abusive move, like abruptly ending things, cheating on you. And then, when you're feeling vulnerable and feel like you're finally, also getting out of this and you're healing, he swoops back in and wants to reconnect with you as well, too. It's so selfish. Like, I've got a lot more to add to that, but I just want to take a breath and say this is completely unacceptable behavior.
Yes, yes, and yes, yeah, everything you just said, Ken. And Ken knows, we talk about this. We don't really love the term discard because, it's not always helpful. But in this case, I would use that term because he he does seem to intentionally be sort of siphoning off some sort of validation or emotion or affection from you, Simone. And then once he's had his fill, once he decides that's enough, I've had enough for my own healing, then he just sort of throws this to the side. And the reason why I avoid using the term discard often is because I don't think it's empowering to the person on the other end. And oftentimes, what seems to be a discard is really somebody trying to protect themselves by leaving a relationship. And that's whether or not that's okay, that's a topic for another day. But in this instance, I think the term is so appropriate. And I mean that to be, it's appropriate to put on him as the offender of somebody who is discarding, which is a terrible action, and not on you, Simone. Not that you are someone who is worthy of being discarded or someone who can be discarded. You, if this makes sense, you are not discarded, but he is discarding like the connection, like he is trying to do that. And I agree with Ken. I'm a coach, Ken is a counselor, and we don't tell people, it's not our jobs to tell people what to do. These are not our lives. We have information, we have guidance, but people are their, autonomous beings, and there's so much value in going inward and discovering things. And sometimes you do have to go through these painful journeys to meet yourself at your own wounding so that you can heal, so that it'll never happen again. There are reasons for these things that we go through in life. But I would say here, please do not let this man back into your life, Simone. Please do not speak with him. He does not, you are so right, he does not deserve one iota of your emotional energy. He does not deserve to take up any more mental and emotional real estate in your beautiful mind and heart and soul and body. I think that this man is very unwell. Again, I'm not qualified to make any sort of diagnosis at all. I can try to, see what attachment style he has. But I have to say, I do think, again, this to me is so far beyond an attachment situation where we can probably safely say his attachment style likely is fearful avoidant. But fearful avoidance are hot and cold and can be chaotic and can self-sabotage and often do, but it is not usually at all to this degree of cruelty, to this degree of almost seemingly intention, to this degree of truly not caring and having like any sense of responsibility for your actions. Fearful avoidance are deeply feeling people, as are dismissive avoidance. And of course, their deep feelings and anxieties manifest differently in hurtful behaviors that often hurt anxious people. And, anxious people's anxiety manifests differently, and that can hurt avoidant people. But here, this, I don't think, this is not typical fearful avoidant behavior. This is, I think, someone who, yes, has a fearful avoidant attachment style, but also has a serious addiction problem, which I think you gave us a little bit more information that sort of denoted that. And I think that this is more just a character issue where this person does not have integrity, does not have, that much kindness to give. And of course, we can say that that's from wounding, but again, our trauma is not our fault and our healing is our responsibility. Just because we have been through some shit in life does not give us license to go around emotionally terrorizing people. And I'll before I give the floor back to Ken, you know, do relationships with avoidant people end up being really painful experiences a lot of the time, especially when we're anxiously attached? Abso-freaking-lutely. But do avoidance like intentionally go in and out, having so little regard for people, um, and just being reckless and careless? Not most of the time. Most of the time, when they come back, they're coming back because their feelings have reignited and they genuinely think, okay, I can handle it this time. And then their fears come up, and human beings will always choose safety over pleasure. So then they kind of book it. And I'm being very reductive here, but my point is, excuse me, my point is, this is just not, I think that this is beyond an attachment issue. And I think that the level of his egregiousness in his actions and carelessness really speaks to, for whatever reason, a low level of character and integrity, in combination with what happens to be probably a fearful avoidant attachment style. What do you think, Ken?
I completely agree with what you said. Like I said, I stand by my claim that I don't like to me, I've heard severe fearful avoidant cases like this before where my brain goes, this is definitely up there. I'm not like there might be some additional stuff too, which would explain the cruelty that's going on too. Like he possibly could have some BPD stuff going on, for instance. I wouldn't say narcissistic tendencies, sure, but I wouldn't necessarily go so far as to say anything more than that, only because limited training in that area, not my place to say that. But I do think there is definitely a lot of raging attachment issues that I see. But at the end of the day, I think the impact of those actions speak for themselves. Like it's so beyond fucked. And I know Simone also wanted to share a bit of additional context to this letter as well, too. I know we've got some questions. I feel like personally, from reading some of the questions, I feel like we've definitely added a lot of insight. Is he avoidant? Definitely not anxiously attached. I'm going to say that now. I'd say he's more avoidant leaning in his fearful avoidance, if I had to share my answer on that. Why has he cut you off again so abruptly? Fear of intimacy is my best thing. Like, I feel like it's just a case of, when things get close, he just freaks out and pushes you away. And did almost 9 years mean so little? It's not about it meaning so little. It's about this is a man who's an addict. You are his drug. But when you get too close, he throws the drug out because he can't handle it. He can only handle you in so many doses. He cannot handle, you being that close with him because then he'd have to be vulnerable, and that is a scary thing for him. It's a very reductive series of answers, but my point simply is to say it's not about the time you've shared together. It's not about the emotions. It's about the fact that this is a man who is selfishly looking to get his needs met in this relationship, emotional needs, and he is using you. That's the long story. Like, that's the long story short.
Yeah, I agree. And and believe me, Simone, I understand it is so, how can we not? How can we not, after being cut off so abruptly, think, did this mean nothing to you? And that's often what we think on the heels of a breakup. And I agree with Ken. It's so not about that. It's not that it meant nothing. It's that there were emotions there, and what it meant and what it was, and what it was bringing up in him was too much. And, human beings are always sort of working in this space of their feelings and fears and trying to manage between them. And when you have attachment wounds, you will always act in accordance with your fears. You will always try to protect yourself instead of seek pleasure. And I think that that is, in essence, what's happening here. I think he was going through a lot. He does have an addiction, which of course does not make him a bad person, but it might make him emotionally volatile, and, unpredictable. And I think his unpredictability is in part what makes him so dangerous, because he flip-flops so much, and he pursues you, and then he cuts you off, and then he begs for your forgiveness, and then he tells you you don't mean anything to him. This is not at all about your worth. This is not at all about your lovability. This is not at all about your worthiness of a partner, or your ability to be in a relationship. This is just about somebody who is incredibly wounded and who does not know how to navigate love or closeness or vulnerability in a healthy way. And I'm sure that he will at some point, come to regret this and feel badly. You are not just this experience is not just going to disappear into the ether. This it won't be like you never existed at all. So it did not mean so little. It did not mean so little, but it was in the hands of someone who could not handle that responsibility, if that makes sense.
Completely agree. And I think that this is why I'm so emphatically saying don't let him back in, because he can't treat you respectfully. He may say he can. I think he genuinely wants to try at times, but his emotional dysregulation, amongst other things, is getting in the way of that. And I'm going to keep going back to this. His unmet needs are at the hands on the driver's seat. If you know what he's doing, he's controlling this dynamic 100%. And so that's why I can tell you now, though, that if you decide to block him, or like exit out of his life, he'll freak the fuck out because his fear of abandonment will go through the roof. But you've got to do it for yourself. Like, I'm sorry, this guy actually needs to feel the weight of you pulling away, to be like, you need to understand what it's like to do this to someone, because you can't treat someone like this. With the remaining time that we have left, should we quickly go through the remaining stuff that Simone sent us, just to add a bit of extra context to the situation?
Yeah, definitely. I think so, Ken. Do you want me to read that, or do you want to read it? I can read it.
Yeah, go for it.
Okay, let's see. Okay, so Simone gave us some extra notes, and we're just going to run through those. Dear Ken, thank you for the opportunity to share my story through the letter I submitted. While I tried to keep my letter concise, there are some additional details about Jack and our relationship that I feel would provide some useful context. If it is possible to include additional details. Oh, okay. So Jack had a pattern throughout our relationship of disappearing or going quiet for days or weeks at a time. However, in the periods when this wasn't happening, he was very loved up and would seek to write to me in intensely romantic and poetic ways. He is a highly educated and gifted writer, though he lost his professional job due to alcoholism and now works ad hoc manual labor jobs. Throughout our nearly 9-year relationship, Jack was the biggest proponent of us being together. He would adamantly express that I was the love of his life and repeatedly tell me he had never felt a love so deep. He claimed to be more sexually attracted to me than anyone he had ever been with, and he would say things like, "When we make love, I feel so happy I could die in that moment." He would read poetry to me, write elaborate and romantic cards, and describe how we just fit together. In terms of his previous relationship with his ex-wife, Jack described her as toxic, claiming she had severe anger issues such as breaking household items during arguments, controlling behavior, and belittling him, including mocking his clothing. At the end of their relationship, after a year of sobriety, Jack relapsed into drinking, which led to his ex-wife throwing him out of their home, a house owned by his father, and refusing to let him see their daughter. He often cried to me about how he missed his daughter and felt powerless to reconnect with her. I always encouraged him to pursue mediation or legal advice to restore his relationship with his daughter, though I tried not to become too involved. Jack claimed he had reached out to his ex-wife via email to arrange discussions, but said that she either ignored him or responded positively at first, only to later become hostile. Despite all of this, Jack never made concrete plans to divorce her or change the living arrangements, even during our long relationship. What I found particularly odd that was that despite describing her as toxic, he oscillated between this view and claiming he didn't resent her, even admired her, which I found perplexing. When we recently met during my visit to the UK, he mentioned that he and his ex-wife are now friends, which left me shocked. While I think it's best that they are civil for the sake of their child, this level of friendliness struck me as contradictory to all he had previously told me about her behavior. What made this revelation even harder to process is that their daughter is now 20 years old, so there's no real need for them to interact beyond polite civility. However, he claimed they now discuss we have things in common, which stung, given the way he discarded me so abruptly, so brutally, despite me having been a loving, supportive partner for nearly a decade. I'm going to pause here to take a sip of water, but also because this is a lot. How does this new information impact, if at all, what we've been reading, what we've been thinking?
Yeah, I'll try and be succinct just for the sake of time, because there is a few bits and pieces here which I think is really interesting. I don't trust his opinion of his ex-partner. I just don't. I mean, and it comes not just from the stuff that's going on here, it's the fact that I go back to idealizing. Splitting, which is when we have extreme positive and negative regard for someone, where at one minute it's, I love you, you're my god or goddess. And then the next minute, I hate you, you're worse than Satan's ass, for instance. That kind of extremity of positive and negative regard is something we see in people who not only exhibit cluster B personality disorders, but also a lot of emotional dysregulation. And I also don't trust him as a narrator. On one hand, he's saying she's controlling this, that, and then he's also saying, oh, but I admire her and we're friends now. It is one thing to say, I have a full spectrum opinion of someone. Look, at heart, I don't think, for example, I could say, look, at heart, I don't think Jack is a bad person, but I think he's got deep emotional wounding, and I wouldn't trust him so far as to have a relationship with him, friend or otherwise. That's a balanced account. But with him, it's very much a case of like extremes. She was controlling and so angry with me. And it makes me think, I bet you anything she tried setting boundaries. And the reason she kicked you out for alcoholism is because that was probably the issue that led to this relationship. Now, it's not to say she wasn't reactive at times. She might have been. But it sounds to me like there's more to the story than what he's letting on.
Yeah, definitely. I agree, and he's definitely not a reliable narrator. Okay, we'll just finish up this letter. So, Jack's family history also seemed to have had a significant impact on him. When Jack was 15, his mother revealed that the man he thought was his father was not his biological father. She admitted that his biological father was a man she'd had a passionate love affair with, but who didn't reciprocate her feelings even after learning she was pregnant. Instead, the man that she was with at the time, who raised Jack, agreed to stand by her and raise Jack as his own, on the condition that it remain a secret. Jack said that this revelation left him deeply feeling betrayed. He described his parents' relationship as passionless and felt his mother had never gotten over her love for his biological father. He believed his presence reminded her of the man she couldn't have, and she poured all of her love and attention over him. Jack also shared that from a very young age, his mother would confide in him about her adult emotions, treating him as an emotional confidant. He described how both of his parents would individually approach him to talk about each other and seek advice, essentially parentifying him. While she said that while he said they otherwise treated him well, encouraging his involvement in acting and performing, and treating him as a part of their adult social lives, this early dynamic seems to have shaped his emotional responses and relationship patterns. Wow. What do you think, Ken?
Emotional incest alert and, parentification. Also, big things here. It sounds to me like, big betrayal wound as well too. I mean, I'm at this stage, I'm just going to be like, I feel like it's no longer a case of, playing avoidant bingo. It's like fearful avoidant, 100 billion percent, like 100 billion percent with all this sort of stuff going on. Because this is a man who has obviously felt deeply and profoundly betrayed by people who are close to him, his mum, and I don't think he believes that he can work through such grief again. And it's clear he doesn't know how to process grief because he's obviously still mourning the loss of his previous relationship. And I feel like there's this sense of hopelessness and powerlessness to him. Like when Simone was being like, why don't you seek out mediation and try and work to get, access to your daughter who's 20 years old? It sounds to me like he almost just hadn't thought of that or tried, or if he had thought about it, he hadn't sort of felt the need to try and challenge some of his fears around that. This man is like a collapsing star where, I feel sorry for him in one way. Like, I feel like this man has got his trauma written on his sleeves, and I feel very, very sorry for him in terms of what he's probably been through. But at the same time, history of alcoholism, that's definitely to numb a lot of the shame. And I imagine that's shame about the fact that he wasn't wanted, that, he was a secret child from his, biological father as well, too. My God, this guy, like, and also the way he's hurting Simone, very similar to the way he was treated growing up as well, too. Getting all this love and affection, but then also being deeply betrayed. It's like history repeating itself, generational trauma.
Oh my gosh, yeah. And right, like Ken said, we are reading and reviewing this letter for Simone's benefit, not Jack's. So, if we were Jack's coach and counselor, we would be, empathizing and sympathizing more with all of these things that very clearly laid the foundation for some serious attachment wounding. But to put the focus on you, Simone, what Ken is saying is right. There's so much going on here. He is so deeply wounded, and that is so unfortunate. But these sorts of things, when not worked out in adulthood, will absolutely, completely rule over your adult romantic relationships. And that includes, many people do develop addictions from attachment wounding. I mean, Gabor Mate talks about that all the time. And it makes sense because, with addiction, it's why it's not why the addiction, it's why the pain. What pain are you trying to numb? And often shame is the most damaging, cancerous pain, emotion thing that we can have from childhood. And unfortunately, fearful avoidance often come from an environment where there is intense parentification and enmeshment. And all of this does result in deep, deep internalized shame. And when you have deep internalized shame, you cannot function healthfully in a relationship with other people. Why? For starters, because you can't even function in a relationship with yourself. And that is why there seems to be so much apparent inner chaos with Jack, which then, of course, manifests into outer chaos and into chaos that he brought to his marriage, to his relationship with his daughter, to his relationship with you, Simone. And also it makes a lot of sense that he was parentified. And so, when people are parentified in childhood, they find it very, very hard to find themselves in committed relationships in adulthood because there is this sense of feeling trapped and feeling, closed in upon. And when you're younger and parentified, some of the ways that you survive that is by sort of trying to break away or trying to carve out some independence for yourself so that you can just get a moment to breathe, so that you can try to meet your own needs because your needs don't matter because your parents are coming first. And the last thing I'll comment on this extra information is that I definitely also agree with Ken that there probably was a pretty significant wound created and then later internalized around this idea that his biological father was someone who he did not have in his life. And then this other man who raised him agreed to raise him under the conditions that it sort of remain a secret. I mean, talk about a way to basically just hand some shame over to a child on a silver platter. There you go. And so, yes, it's very sad and unfortunate. And at the same time, because this is about you, Simone, you know, I agree with Ken. This is not unfortunately, he's not an emotionally safe person to have in your life. And this is evidenced by this whole thing.
I completely agree. I completely agree. I think just to round out, I want to say I'm so sorry that you've gone through this. Like, this is beyond a fucked situation for everyone involved, but especially you, Simone. Like, this is not okay. You didn't deserve to have what happened to you. It's not okay that he didn't work through his unhealed trauma, that he reenacted the pain of what he had been through growing up on you. Neil Strauss talks a lot about that in his book, The Truth. But I think that, he's absolutely, I'm going to say it, re-traumatized you, not in the traditional word of what we think of re-traumatized, in that re-traumatizing typically means I, was triggered and I brought up all these old experiences. I'm using it in a bit of a loose way, saying he has reenacted the pain of his past onto you, and you didn't deserve that.
Yeah, absolutely. And, one more thing, Simone, I hope that you understand that you have nothing to be ashamed of. Um, I have seen such beautiful growth and such amazing new chapters of people's lives be birthed on the heels of the most excruciating breakups. And I'm not trying to, bright side you or say, hey, look at the silver lining. But the fact remains, here we are in life. This relationship is over. You have survived it. And now you have your whole future and you have so much time still in your life to learn from this, to grow from this, to carve out um this idea or the standard of this kind of relationship that you want or kind of life that you want. And I want you to know, just lastly, sometimes we feel this big sense of shame of how could I have stayed so long? Like how did this go on for so long? And I want you to know it is so common for people to be in these sorts of situations for years. Why? Because sometimes the longer you stay, the harder it is to get out. And when love is involved, and especially when intermittent reinforcement is present, the way that Jack was intermittently reinforcing you, it quite literally becomes an addiction in you that you might not even realize, which makes it very, very hard to leave. So, again, Simone, we're so sorry, and we wish you nothing but healing after this experience that you have been through.
1 billion% agree. So just to round out here, thank you for submitting this letter. If anyone else would like to submit a letter, the opening for that will be back in early March, because we're just getting through the letters for January and February. And like I was saying at the beginning of this podcast episode, if anyone wants to request a particular team member to talk about their stuff, you're very welcome to do so. I try and diversify to let my team show off and flex their knowledge and their compassion and wisdom and empathy. But yeah, this was a very, very complex and very just heart-wrenching experience for Simone and Jack, particularly Simone. In any case, thank you, everyone. If you found this particularly validating and helpful, please feel free to leave a review on Spotify. It helps us out. Leave a comment. And we will see you guys for the next letter reading.